I chose him 6 times before the wedding. He only had to leave once. There is a specific kind of woman who destroys a good thing not because she doesn't want it, but because she doesn't trust that she does. I know that woman. I was her, for 11 months, in a shared apartment with cedar-scented coats hanging by the door and a ring with a chip in one stone that I wore like a question I kept answering wrong. I did not lose Marcus because I didn't love him. I lost him because I loved him in the most expensive way possible, by spending everything I had proving it was real. My name is Thalia, 28, brand designer at an agency on the east side of the city. I build identities for companies that don't know who they are yet. I take their confusion and make it look like intention. Make it look like whatever shape they've landed on was the only shape it could ever have been. People call me magnetic. They say rooms feel like they started when I walked in, that I have the kind of energy you want at a party and the kind of face you remember after. For a long time, I accepted all of this at face value, the way you accept things you've heard often enough to believe. It never occurred to me that I had spent so long performing certainty that I had confused it with actually feeling certain. Marcus proposed on a Wednesday in November. No restaurant, no gathered audience. Just the two of us in the apartment we'd shared for 2 years, the kitchen light on, his face entirely certain in the way it was always certain when he had decided something. He held out a ring, his grandmother's, vintage, with a hairline chip in one of the side stones that caught the light wrong. When he put it on my finger, I ran my thumb across that chip, back and forth, and something settled in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. 2 months before that, on a rainy Tuesday, he showed up at my studio with lunch from the Thai place on the corner. He had asked them to hold the cilantro because I had mentioned once, not recently but months earlier in the middle of a completely different conversation, that the cilantro there used to bother me. He hadn't written it down. He had simply remembered, the way he remembered everything I said, with the total retention of someone for whom the details of another person are not a burden but a language. He didn't announce it. He set the bag on my desk and sat down and talked about something else while I ate. That was Marcus. He filed everything, and he showed love by solving problems before you named them. At a family dinner in December, a few weeks after the proposal, I sat at my parents' table and watched my mother adjust her answer about where they would spend the holidays 4 separate times in one meal. Each time she started a sentence, she glanced at my father's face and redirected herself before finishing the thought. She never noticed herself doing it. It had simply become her natural way of moving through a room where his opinion was the gravity. I counted to 4 and drove home early. He put his hand on my knee in the car and asked if something had happened at dinner. Just tired, I said. He didn't push. That was also Marcus. He gave you the exit you asked for, even when he knew you were using it. The following week, he showed me photos of the wedding venue he had already confirmed. Deposit paid, catering shortlisted, 2 backup dates secured. He said he knew I froze under pressure about big decisions, so he had handled the logistics. He was genuinely pleased, not with himself, but with the venue, the imagined day, the idea of it. He asked twice gently whether there was anything I wanted to change. I said no. It was beautiful. He set the phone down. I meant that. And at the exact same moment, underneath all of it, something moved through my chest that I chose not to look at, something that sounded, if I had let it speak, like nobody asked. That night, I found a message from Owen in my phone, sitting unread for 3 days. Marcus's college roommate, groomsman number 1, someone I had spoken to maybe 8 times. A casual invitation to the groomsmen planning dinner the following week. I typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed it again. Third version, sent. The groomsmen dinner was at a wine bar on 5th. 14 people, 2 tables pushed together, candles burning low at each end, and the kind of ambient noise that makes every conversation feel like it's happening inside a secret. Marcus was at the far end, deep in a discussion about flight booking windows and venue logistics with his brother-in-law and two of his oldest friends. He was happy there, in his element, managing details, running the numbers, making sure the day would work. I watched him from the other end of the table and felt, with a precision that surprised me, both love and something adjacent to erasure. Owen sat beside me. Until that evening, I had thought of him the way you think of most background people: present, pleasant, not part of my story. Somewhere between the second glass and the third, after the table had gotten louder and nobody was paying attention to any particular two people, Owen asked me what I actually wanted the wedding to look like. Not what Marcus had arranged, not what the venue was offering. What I, personally, wanted from that day. I stopped talking and looked at him. 11 months into the engagement and nobody had asked me that. Not once. I had been consulted on the dress and the invitation font, and Marcus had managed everything else because he believed that handling logistics on my behalf was the same as caring for me. It wasn't unkind. It was who he was. But Owen asked the question and then simply waited, elbows on the table like he had nowhere else to be. I talked for almost 40 minutes. The light I wanted in the room, not overhead fluorescent, not theatrical, but something like late afternoon on a Tuesday in September, the kind that makes everything look like it's already a memory. Music that sounded like something I would actually put on at home, not assembled from a streaming service template. Strong opinions about flowers that had been waiting for an invitation to exist. As I was talking, I could hear how long all of it had been sitting there, compressed into a space I hadn't realized I was keeping. Owen asked follow-up questions. Real ones. He had no agenda. He was a person paying actual attention to what another person was saying, and in the context of the previous 11 months, that felt like something radical. It wasn't romantic, or not only that. Either way, that wasn't the reason I was still at the table at 11:30, the group down to 4 people and 2 missed calls from Marcus on my phone. I told Marcus, coming home at 3 in the morning, that the dinner had run long and some people had moved to someone's apartment after. He was awake at the kitchen table, no lights on except the street outside throwing a yellow stripe across the floor. He looked at me and asked quietly if I had eaten, and when I said no, he got up and reheated something from the refrigerator without being asked. I had not been at someone's apartment. I had been at Owen's building in Midtown for 2 hours. The detail I remember most clearly is that the air there smelled nothing like Marcus's cedar coat. Not the cedar, not the black pepper underneath it, not the particular warmth of his closet that meant home in a way I had never let myself name. That absence was something I had sought out on purpose. Coming home afterward was what made it honest, I told myself. The return was the decision. The decision was the proof that I was choosing this life, this person, this apartment, and not simply existing inside something that had already been arranged for me. A week later, Marcus sat across from me at the kitchen table with his coffee in both hands and asked, carefully, whether something had changed between us. He named a specific detail. At my cousin's dinner 3 weeks back, I hadn't reached for his hand across the table, which I always did, and he needed to know if something had happened or if he had done something he wasn't aware of. He kept his eyes on the table while he spoke. I understood, watching him, that the question had cost him something. A man who ran on certainty had spent 7 days finding the right moment for this conversation. This was it. I told him he was converting a difficult few weeks into a performance review. Said he made me feel like a task with a deadline. I watched his face absorb it and called his reaction the problem. The truth, which I couldn't afford to look at, was that I needed him to fail the test. I needed him to be controlling, suffocating, something I could point at, so the story I was building about why I was doing what I was doing would hold its structure. He kept not failing it the right way, so I kept redefining what failure looked like. 2 evenings later, he tried again. He said he could give me whatever space I needed, but he had to know whether that space was general or whether something specific had happened, because the apartment felt different and he wasn't going to pretend otherwise. He said it from the kitchen doorway, not quite inside the room, like he was giving me the option not to answer. He said he needed to understand what was happening before it moved somewhere he couldn't follow. The second attempt cost him more than the first. I could hear it in the way he was holding something back. I told him that examining my need for space was exactly what I had always been afraid of. Used afraid deliberately. It framed his concern as something I needed protection from and made me the person being crowded. He stepped back slightly from the doorway. I noticed and moved on. Over the next 4 months, there were 5 more evenings. Different nights, different people from the Groomsmen group, always something tethered to the wedding calendar that gave me a surface reason for being where I was. Every time I came back to the apartment and lay down beside Marcus in the dark, I told myself the return was the proof. Walking through the door every single time was me choosing him. I believed this completely. I was wrong about it. Nadia found out about the first night by accident. Walking home on a Friday, she passed Owen's building at 1:15 and saw my olive coat through the lobby glass. She sent a single question mark. I saw it, read it, left it unanswered. At brunch 2 days later, she mentioned, looking at her coffee, that she thought she had seen me near Owen's building Friday night. I laughed, said it was probably someone in a similar coat. Half the city had one that winter. She nodded once and asked the waiter for more coffee. She didn't mention the question mark, didn't mention it had gone unanswered for 48 hours. She picked up her cup, and her face was completely still. That stillness was the most accurate thing in the room. I kept eating. The engagement party was a Saturday in March. Eleanor's planning, 35 guests at a rooftop restaurant called the Pembroke, string lights overhead, and the bridge lit up to the west. Waitstaff moved through the room with champagne flutes that caught the light. And from the right angle, the whole evening looked exactly the way an engagement party is supposed to look in a photograph. Marcus wore the dark jacket I had mentioned exactly once that I liked on him. He remembered. The evening was fine for the first 2 hours. I moved through it the way I moved through every room, fast and warm, leaving behind conversations I had made feel important. Marcus stayed close without crowding. He introduced me to his colleague from the East Office as the person who made him make sense to himself, which was the kind of thing he said when he wasn't performing anything, and I held it. Near the appetizer table, he said something quiet in my ear that made me actually laugh, and for a moment I could feel what we were supposed to be, what we still were underneath everything I had been doing to it. Joel gave a toast midway through the night. Champagne in hand, genuine warmth, and the declaration that Marcus had finally caught the most interesting woman any of them had ever met. The room laughed. I laughed. Good toast. The correct response was to blush a little and say something brief and gracious and raise my glass. And that was what Marcus glanced at me expecting, his face open and warm. Then something rose through me from a place I hadn't been monitoring, and before any real decision was involved, I was on my feet. "Nobody catches me," I said. "I'm not a fish." The room laughed again, differently, a recalibrating sound. "What I love about Marcus," I said, "is that he understood from day one that I don't belong to anyone." Several women raised their glasses, and I kept going. Love shouldn't feel like ownership. I chose to be here freely. Women should be allowed to say that at their own engagement parties. Said it warmly. Said it like honesty rather than like dismantling something in public in front of 35 people who loved us both. I finished and sat down, and someone I didn't know well touched my arm and said that was so authentic. A few glasses went up. Elena's didn't. Marcus's smile was working hard to hold its shape. He found me 15 minutes later, took my hand, and walked me to the terrace railing away from the nearest group, voice low and even. He said he had heard something real underneath what I said, not the fish line, the part after it, and he needed to know whether I was expressing something genuine about how I felt inside this relationship, or whether it was the champagne reading the room wrong. He said he wasn't asking to catalogue it. He was asking because it mattered and he was standing right there in front of me. No accusation in it. He held my hand the way he always did, his thumb moving across my knuckles. I told him he was cataloguing drama, said not every word out of my mouth at a party was a position paper on our marriage. The problem, I said, was that he turned everything into a data point and couldn't let a moment simply exist, and that was exactly what I had always been afraid of. He looked at me a moment when I finished, then turned and walked back inside. Straight, deliberate, no turning around. The first time it crossed my mind that what I had been reading as emotional blunting might be something else entirely. His second attempt came near the bar later, while the dancing was starting, while we were briefly alone among strangers. He stood beside me and looked at the bridge lights reflecting on the water below and asked, just the one word, nothing built around it, whether I was still sure. Said it like someone who has already spent time preparing for the answer they don't want. Yes, I said, without turning to look at him. Earlier in the evening, I had slid the ring off at the bar and set it beside my glass. Fingers felt swollen, I said to no one in particular, the heat up here. The ring sat there while I had 2 conversations, champagne in my bare left hand. 22 minutes. Eleanor appeared at my elbow between songs and pressed the ring back into my palm. Her fingers closed around mine for 1 second before she let go. She said nothing, didn't meet my eyes. I thanked her. She was already gone. In the guest bathroom, between the toast and the dancing, I stood at the mirror with my lipstick uncapped and unused. Something cold moved through my chest. 4 or 5 seconds. Not guilt exactly. Something older and less specific, the kind of feeling that visits you when you are in the middle of doing something you will not be able to explain later. Part of me had seen clearly what I was doing and sent up a signal, and I stood there and registered it, and then covered it with lipstick, and went back out, and kept going as though the 4 seconds hadn't happened. In the car going home, Marcus didn't ask again. The city went past the window. The silence between us had a shape that it hadn't had before, not hostile, just altered, like furniture moved 2 inches in the dark. You don't notice it until you walk into it. I ran my thumb over the chip in the ring and watched the bridge disappear behind us. Easter Sunday at Marcus's parents' house. Diane's table, 8 people, roast chicken, and the kind of conversation that moves from summer plans to mortgage rates to a neighbour's renovation without anyone steering it. I participated with the surface half of my attention. The rest of me was somewhere I couldn't name. Between courses, Diane found me in the kitchen carrying dishes, put her hand on my forearm, and asked, with genuine care in her voice, whether I was ready for this kind of life. Not this day, not this family, this kind of life. The permanence of it, the forward weight. A door, not a judgment. I understood this while she was saying it. She had watched her son for 32 years and she knew him well. His certainty, his retention, the way he loved at full volume in a register that other people might not always hear. She was giving me an exit, if I needed one, in the kitchen, between courses, where nobody else would see. I gave her the answer I'd been giving everyone for months, that I was sure, that Marcus was exactly who I wanted, that I'd never felt more certain of anything. She held my gaze a moment longer than comfortable, the kind of look that doesn't accuse and doesn't relent, and then went back to the dining room. I stood there for a moment before following. 2 nights later, I found Marcus at the kitchen table. Laptop closed, nothing in front of him, just sitting. Not working, not reading, just still in the way of someone who has been there long enough that stillness has become its own activity. I asked if he was working. He said no. He said he had been sitting there trying to figure out what to do with the feeling that he had been building something carefully, piece by piece, for 2 years, and he couldn't tell any more whether I was building it beside him or whether he had been building alone while I stood somewhere else. He said it without drama, without engineering the moment. He was tired and sad in a plain human way. He said what was true. I decided it was passive aggression. Told myself he was constructing an emotional climate designed to make me feel responsible for repairing it. He was a man whose love ran on certainty, and certainty had run dry. He didn't know what to be without it. He was sitting there being lost, and instead of sitting next to him in it, I identified it as a technique and called it theatre and went to bed. The next morning he said he had heard me, the fear about losing myself, the need to feel chosen rather than managed. He said the venue booking was a failure on his part, that he had confused certainty with consideration, and he was sorry for it, clearly and without conditions. He said it standing in the kitchen with his coffee before either of us had our shoes on. The most open he had been in 4 months, which meant I was already 2 moves ahead in the wrong direction. He asked what he should do differently going forward, what that would actually look like in practice. Then, once, quietly, in a register that had nothing to do with the argument we weren't having. If I wasn't sure, he would rather hear it now than learn it later in a form that left him no real choices. I told him I was sure. Part of it was true. The part that was true was real, and I meant it completely. And the part I didn't mean was what I had been protecting behind the part I did, and I could no longer tell exactly where that boundary ran. 8 days of something softer followed. I let myself exist inside it. Then, in a yoga studio parking lot on a Wednesday afternoon, Priya told Nadia that Derek had shared something with her about the period before the wedding, something involving the groomsmen and me, and she had been carrying it for months without knowing what to do with it. She said she had given Derek the chance to handle it and watched him minimize it instead. Nadia stopped walking. Priya said she didn't know if it was her place to act on it. Nadia said nothing. She drove home and sat in her car outside her building for 20 minutes without getting out, hands on the wheel, engine off. Nadia had known since January. She had stayed quiet because losing me felt worse than enabling me, and because she had believed, the way people believe things they need to be true, that it would stop before anyone had to decide anything. What Priya said in that parking lot changed the category of what Nadia had been doing. It reclassified the silence from loyalty to complicity, and those are different things with different weights. That same week, Marcus started leaving his phone face down on every surface. Counter, nightstand, coffee table. Always face down without drama, like a new and ordinary habit. I saw an unfamiliar email address briefly open on his laptop screen before he closed it. His home office drawer had been reorganized, not emptied, just sorted with a careful tidiness that means someone has begun to categorize what belongs where, what is shared and what is not. I noticed all of it, explained it to myself the wrong way. He had stopped trying to understand and started trying to document. Those are different activities. Only one of them requires that kind of organization. The organized drawer said more than he probably meant it to. Sunday evening, Nadia called. She didn't say what Priya had told her. She asked one question, in a voice I had never heard from her before, flat, direct, no softness around it. Thalia, how many? I hung up. Sat on the bathroom floor for a while with the door locked and the fan on. Then I texted Owen and asked if we could meet. Owen suggested the bar at a hotel called the Faro downtown. I told myself I was going there to end things cleanly, draw a clear line and move forward with the part of my life that was supposed to matter. I put on the green dress from the engagement party because it was the first thing I reached for, and I didn't ask myself why. The Faro's bar was half full. String lights over the bottles, low music, the kind of place that absorbs conversations without holding them. I ordered something with gin and sat across from Owen in a corner booth. 2 drinks, then a third. Then I told Owen everything, all 6, and the internal logic I had built around each one, and the whole framework about proving I was choosing Marcus rather than being absorbed into him. I told him about my mother adjusting her answers at the dinner table until she had no opinions left that were her own. And the conclusion I had drawn from watching that commitment was the mechanism by which a woman stops existing as a separate person, and the way I had decided, early and privately and without ever saying it out loud, that I would not let that happen to me. I told him about the panic attack in the bathroom 6 weeks after the proposal, which I had never told anyone, including Marcus, 10 minutes alone on the tile with my back against the cabinet, telling myself it was excitement and nearly believing it. I talked about what I had been doing to the engagement. Not sabotage, not avoidance, something I still couldn't name precisely, but something that had the shape of testing it. I talked for a long time. Owen sat across from me in the booth, and his face moved through several expressions I hadn't seen on it before. Something more complicated and less comfortable than the easy attention I had been trading on for months. A person recalibrating what they had agreed to by showing up. He asked whether I was going to tell Marcus. No, I said. He asked again, differently. He said he could not know what he knew and remain Marcus's friend. He said it simply, like a fact about his own character rather than a position he was taking. He added that he could not hold this and also keep showing up to be Marcus's best man. I told him Marcus didn't have to stay his best man. He looked at me for a long moment, long enough that I understood he was not going to look away first. He asked me to leave. I didn't leave. I ordered one more drink and took out my phone and showed him a photo, Marcus and me at the venue walkthrough, both of us laughing, his hand warm on my shoulder. You see, I said. I chose him every single time. The return was always the choice. Owen looked at the photo and said quietly that he hoped that was true. His voice when he said it told me he did not think it was. Then he stood up and walked out without finishing his drink or looking back. I sat there 20 minutes. Something settled over me that felt like clarity but was closer to the absence of options. Then I picked up my phone and posted an Instagram story, me alone at the bar, the string lights above the bottles, the Farrow's location tag visible at the top. No caption. I did not think about Marcus seeing it. Marcus saw it at 11:08. I know because he told me when he called. I had told him I was at Nadia's for dinner. Nadia's apartment is 15 minutes from the Farrow, in a different neighborhood. He said he had seen the story. He named the hotel. He said, without making a performance of it, that he had been keeping a list, dates, times, locations that didn't match what I had told him, because things had stopped adding up 4 months ago and writing them down was the only way to hold the information without acting on it before he understood what it meant. He said he had been trying to find the explanation that didn't require him to think the thing he had been trying not to think. He said he still loved me. He wanted one honest conversation, not a version of the truth, just what had actually been happening. Come home, he said. Tell me what's real, and we'll figure out from there what's possible. His voice had the quality of someone who has decided what they are willing to say and said it, and is now waiting. I told him that keeping a list was exactly what I had known he would do. Said this was the surveillance I had always been afraid of, his way of converting a marriage into records and documentation. Said he had made keeping a secret feel necessary, and that was his part in this. I started crying. The crying was not entirely a performance. I was genuinely afraid, but the fear was aimed at the wrong thing. He needed to understand, I said, that I had come home every single time. He was quiet for long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, once, calmly, he was going to handle things properly. Same tone as the rest of the call. Then he ended it. In the cab for a few minutes, I felt like I had redirected it, made him the one who had to explain himself. The driver's radio was off. The city went past the window. The silence in that car was the loudest thing I had been inside in a long time, and somewhere in it, something came clear that hadn't before. My thumb found the chip in the ring the way it always did, and I sat with it, and then one thought arrived, quiet and late. A chip is a damage. I had spent 11 months running my thumb over it and calling it character. I came home to a clean apartment. Dishes done, his side of the bed made with hospital corners. I opened the bedroom door. He was either asleep or producing a convincing impression of it. I stood in the doorway long enough to know he wasn't going to turn over. Then I went to the couch. In the morning, his overnight bag wasn't in the hall closet. His laptop wasn't on the desk. A coffee cup sat drying in the rack that hadn't been there when I fell asleep. He had come back at some point, moved quietly through the apartment, taken what he needed, made a cup of coffee, and left again without waking me. I hadn't heard any of it. 8 days later, a Sunday morning, 2 bags of groceries, one in each arm, heavy enough that I stopped in the lobby to redistribute the weight before the elevator. A man I didn't recognize stepped toward me and asked my name. When I gave it, he handed me a set of folded documents and walked back out through the door. Formal divorce petition, temporary financial orders, a freeze on the joint account pending equitable division, a request for exclusive occupancy of the apartment, a first hearing date 6 weeks from that Sunday. I stood in the lobby and read the first 2 pages. The doorman looked at the potted fern near the entrance and did not look at me. The petition referenced documented evidence of a pattern of conduct during the engagement and early marriage period. 3 weeks earlier, Priya had sent Marcus a screenshot thread. Months of texts between Derek and me, including some from after the wedding. She had sent them because Derek had minimized it to her one final time and she was done carrying information that belonged to someone else. Nadia had provided a written statement. The Instagram story from the Faro was cited with a timestamp. The hotel was named. I called Elena, gave her the context, the fear, the internal logic of what had happened and why it looked different from inside. Elena listened to all of it. Then she told me that at the engagement party she had watched me take the ring off and walk away from it, and when she picked it up from the bar she knew something was wrong. She had told Marcus about it 2 weeks later, when he came to her asking what she had noticed. She was sorry, she said. She had already spoken to him. Everything that followed assembled itself whether I was ready or not. I moved into Nadia's second bedroom, 1 bed, white walls, my largest suitcase in the corner. Guilt and love don't end at the same place, and she let me in because she needed to as much as I needed to be let in. The joint account stayed frozen. I managed on my own, and was careful. 7 days before the first hearing, my attorney told me in a beige waiting room that all 6 groomsmen had provided written statements. I didn't attend the hearing. My attorney went alone. Owen sent one message 3 days after the petition arrived. "I'm sorry this happened." I read it twice and didn't reply. There was nothing to say to someone who had watched the whole thing and asked me to leave and been right about everything. The wedding hashtag went quiet, and 3 people from the guest list sent messages asking if we were okay. I never opened them. I had believed that freedom and commitment could be held in the same hand, that the trick was to keep moving and choose deliberately and never stand still long enough for one to swallow the other. What I proved instead was simpler and worse. That distance maintained long enough stops looking like a choice. It stops looking like agency. It just starts looking like who you are. In the attorney's waiting room, I held the ring in my closed fist, the chip pressed into my palm the way it always had. I sat with it there for the full 40 minutes, running my thumb over it the way I always had done, and then I stopped and put the ring in my jacket pocket and kept it there. I didn't put it back on. What remains? A single bed in my best friend's spare room with a window that looks at a brick wall, an empty ring box on a dresser. I moved from the apartment on floor 7, and the quiet of a life in which no one is certain of me anymore. No one checks where I am. No one remembers what I said once about cilantro. No one leaves their side of the bed made. That was what I had been trying to protect. I should have understood, before I started protecting it, what protecting it would cost. Closure. Snapshot. 14 days after the petition, Marcus's movers came for the rest of his things. Nadia drove me to a coffee shop 2 neighborhoods over and kept me there until it was done. His side of the closet was empty by 2 in the afternoon. The cedar smell from his coats was gone within a day. By Wednesday, the ring was in a small white envelope in the top drawer of the dresser in Nadia's spare room. Not returned, not thrown away, just set down somewhere I wouldn't see it unless I was looking. I stopped running my thumb over the chip. The apartment on floor 7 was listed the week after the first hearing. It sold in 8 days. I saw the listing go to pending on a real estate app at 7 in the morning, alone in the spare room, and I put the phone face down on the mattress and lay there in the dark for a while, and eventually it was morning.